Welcome to Baddies for the People. I'm Rachel Pearl Jacobs.
And I'm Cheyenne Hunt.
And we're your resident bad bitches.
Let's get into it. Welcome back, baddies. It's time for
What's the Tea with Me, where we tell you all of the things we aren't doing with our lives. So,
unfortunately, my tea this week is that there's a lot I'm not doing. I saw this study, and it was put in the form of a nice bar graph. We know how much I love a good graph. And it showed the trends of the amount of time that people are spending in their own homes over the last decade. And obviously, it makes sense that in 2020, that would jump massively. It was like 3 times, 4 times more time people were spending at home per day on average. What I thought was interesting was through the years since, it hasn't gone down. People are spending just as much time in their homes as we were when we were forced to be there. And we said that we hated it. And it was like crushing to the human psyche. And yet that became the habit. And so I was thinking about it and I was like, oh my God, that's me. Because of course I'm like racking my brain going, how is that possible? Because everybody's gone back to work and, you know, life goes on. But I work from home and I haven't changed my habits literally at all. And of course, there's all the research about how it's awful for you and you lose friendships and it's bad for your mental health and your physical health. And like all of that is true. But I don't know like what to do about it. And of course, like the first time I read it, I'm pointing my fingers like, how could everybody still be doing this? It's me. I'm everybody.
Well, as someone who was ready for COVID because I never left my house ever in the first place, I was chilling. And I spent a lot of money on my fucking rent. Like, of course, I'm in my house all the time. I have to get a return on my investment. Like, I think that's what it is. As housing prices have literally tripled, so has our time inside.
I don't think that's why.
You're right.
I think it's a good way to try to justify it for sure. I pay a lot more for my housing now, but I also wish that I had a more connected social life and we're in what the Surgeon General deemed an epidemic of loneliness. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with it.
I think it has that, like the epidemic of loneliness is good old American individualism, okay? That this is what that is manifesting. If you think about in generations past, people lived in multi-generational homes. They were closer together. And with technology, you're connected to people all over the world. So we're talking to people who are miles and miles away from us. And because I go on Clubhouse.
Yeah, which is crazy. I don't know why you do that. Every time I go on, I'm like, this is brain damage.
See, maybe I'm a masochist.
Yeah, it's just people screaming at each other.
Well, yeah, and I'm screaming at them.
Maybe it's like cathartic for you. It's like a place where you can get it all out.
Yes, you are a fucking idiot. But also it's how I like stay up to date with my like white supremacist like ideology and where the movements
what their tactics are.
Yeah, like what the day-to-day is, what the media they're consuming is. And I think that also people just suck. And because of that,
people suck. I think we think people suck because all we do is watch videos on social media that tell you about how bad people are. When I actually go outside into the real world and I have interactions with the barista or the person at the grocery store, my like faith in humanity is restored by these like micro moments of connection and human kindness. And then I get back on Facebook and Instagram, scroll and doom scroll and think the world's ending all over again. It's like touch grass, talk to a person.
Yes, but at the same time, people don't wash their hands. They're dirty. They don't brush their teeth and they smell. And like, why
I did lose a little bit of faith in humanity today. I went to an event before I got here and it was at like a moose lodge or an elk's lodge, like one of those things. And I sat in my chair and I grabbed it to scoot up and I felt like this layer of grime on the chair. And I picked my hand up and I looked at it and smelled it. And
you smelled it?
Because I wanted to know what it was.
Oh, nah.
I needed to know if I like what was on my hand.
No.
And pee. It was literally dried pee. And you know, like if you've ever had like a pet, like a puppy or something that you're taking care of, like you know what that smell is. And that like disgusting feeling, it's very specific. Like you don't mix that up with something else. And I'm like, why is there pee on my hand?
That's what you said? Just like that?
Yeah. It is. It is. And I had to go like excuse myself and deal with it. I did lose a little bit of faith in humanity there. So I still think, though, it's worth going out and facing the world and connecting with people more. It's good for your mental health. And every so often you might encounter a peach hair. But, sometimes you gotta roll up your sleeves and do it for the human connection, I guess.
So that kind of like ties into my tea well because I'm in trial right now and
You peed in your chair in trial?
absolutely not. But I do have to pee a lot and like you kind of have to like raise your hand and ask the judge to go to the bathroom and it's really awkward. But
Yeah.
pause on that. Yeah, so my tea is that I work for like someone who is at the top of their field and I don't think you can be like incredibly great without being like
A little crazy.
yeah, I was going to say massively unhinged, but it's not like a
that's so
little.
true.
I think it's like a lot. Like you have to be a main character in your own show
Yeah.
to be the best.
I've experienced that for sure, where it's like the people who I worked with on the Hill that were the ones that had actually made it, like they were there 40 years, like they were top of their field. They are weird. They're weird people because they're so intense.
Yes, but also like it's so awesome.
Watching them when they're doing their craft.
Yes, which is also like we don't watch people who suck at sports play sports. We only watch top athletes.
Unless you have kids, and then you have to go watch them, and it's notoriously not fun.
See, I think there's like different. Your kid is either, I mean, there's two ways to enjoy that experience. Either your kid is really athletic or they're just like tragically not. But like if your kid is mediocre, that sucks for you. For real. Like if your kid is mediocre, then they should find something else to do. I never understood why when I was younger, some people's parents wanted them to be so good at this thing and they weren't really passionate about it. So they were mid and then they just kept doing the shit they were mid at. Who does that?
Well, sometimes people are doing things for enrichment outside of just achievement, for fitness, for socialization.
Yes. And if I wanted to socialize, I would do something that was socially oriented, that was purely socializing, not something that someone could be superior at than me.
My eyebrows are raising.
Dude, I'm so competitive.
Yeah, clearly.
Do something halfway. That's actually, looking back, like in college, I was a nutcase. And
I was a nutcase too. It's like that's why I
so intense.
That's definitely why I never played team sports. I was always a solo sport person because I was the same way. Like I don't want to potentially risk being perceived being bad at something ever.
Interesting. You cared about perception, like how other people perceived you.
Yes.
I cared about like showing everyone how great I was. For real, but it's fun to know that you arrived.
Yes.
Yeah, like it's a continuum and you get to express yourself through something. And that was the part that was really fun for me. But if I expressed myself through something, I didn't want to be like subpar at it. No one wants to.
But sometimes you can. That's like totally valid. You can express yourself through something and not be the best at it. I'm saying this like I have the same issue. Like it would also spark issues in me. But for those at home, like I don't want to instill this idea. Like I think the thing that we should aspire to is doing things because we enjoy them, not necessarily because we're the best.
No, absolutely. But I think that like I enjoy being the best. For real. Like,
Well, no shit.
yeah.
Everybody does. Everybody does. Oh my God.
But no, because I can go and like paint or like do something that I know that I'm not good at and enjoy it just for it being it and not feel that competitive aspect. But when it's like physical.
Oh, so that turns it into something different for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sure. I
Like,
could see that.
you know those like baking shows?
Yes.
Oh yeah, like I can't cook. Like I could join a cooking competition for being bad at it and like
You wouldn't be tripping about that.
no.
Yeah.
Or cleaning? Bruh.
What do you mean clean? Is that competitive cleaning?
No, but I mean like if I was to lose at something, it would be cleaning.
Oh. Oh my God. Yeah. I only clean when I'm anxious and I need to like do something else.
Oh, yeah, but I haven't been anxious cleaning in like a long time.
That's good.
It's just, it can be exercised in other ways.
That's usually like one step before like a full crash out for me. Dang, if I'm in a mouse, like, oh yeah, for sure. Like everyone is like, oh,
Never been scrubbing, but totally relate.
wow, that's some really good tea. Do you want to put a bow on that, or do you feel like we've
I have
arrived?
no idea what I've just said. It may be horrendous.
And with that, because that just made me cringe, it's time for cringe. Rachel, I'm gonna start because I have to get this off my chest. I cringed really hard this week seeing Anna Paulina Luna, who is a really well-known right-wing nut job representative, introduce this legislation that would institute the death penalty in child sexual abuse cases, which let's put that in the box over here. And then also in the box over here, look at the fact that she is well known to be really good friends with former Congressman Matt Gaetz, who was investigated by the House Ethics Committee for committing sex crimes against minors. And she said herself, I want to read this. She put out a public statement that said, former Congressman Matt Gaetz is one of my closest friends in Congress. The hypocrisy for me is just a lot. Like, I really cannot. And I feel like this is such a common thing with this, like, fringe right wing community where it's like everyone that they don't like is a groomer. Everyone that they don't like is a child predator. But when there's obviously predators in their ranks, they are like completely turning a blind eye. Like, Donald Trump was found liable for rape in a civil court, and you guys are like unbothered. So, yeah, I'm cringing.
First of all, the death penalty is so 1935. Like,
Sidebar on the death penalty. I want it known for the listeners that there's the vast majority of the legal community are anti-death penalty because when you experience how much bias and how many errors there are in the criminal justice system, how often people are wrongfully convicted, how easy it is to frame someone, to railroad someone, to have police falsify evidence, for a prosecutor to like wrongfully go after someone to bolster their record. All of those things happen all the time. And it seems completely immoral to have a system that is that biased and then also be killing people within it.
yes. So that's the death penalty piece.
Yeah, that's my sidebar.
Now next,
The other piece.
like the whole, okay, wait, there was this one other thing. I feel like when you're like, her name is Anna Paulina Luna, like that's a lot of N's and A's. And I don't know. It's giving a red flag. I don't know. Something about the way her name is Anna Paulina Luna, like that sounds like a red flag. Sure. If that was like, if you were gonna have like an evil right-wing character on a TV show, like her name sounds like
Anna
that.
Paulina Luna.
Yeah, it sounds like a character name.
So does Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, I feel you.
So there's that. I just had to,
Okay.
But I think it's more though that the laws don't apply to them and their friends. So like
Ever.
but it's more of a virtue signaling thing than a real care or effort to create change. I wonder if this just recorded me swallowing my spit.
Probably.
It felt like a loud one.
Well, other than that, Rachel, what made you cringe this week?
Well, as the fires rage on in LA, I'm cringing at the fact that in 2024, California voted to keep involuntary servitude. And that amounts to young men and boys ages 18 to 24, 95% of which are Black, Latino, and Filipino, are fighting the fires for less than $5 an hour.
Oh my God. The way you responded to that was just like,
it was like, bruh. Like, bruh.
I'm just so tired of the way that this country is getting more and more blatant about the way that we just don't value human life, particularly men of color, like people of color. But these young men that are literally on the front lines putting their lives at risk, and not just in the sense that like they're going to get injured immediately on the front lines, but it's lifelong health hazards that you have from this kind of smoke inhalation, from the chemicals, from the particulates. Like they're going to be paying the price for this for the rest of their lives. And we're giving them less than $5 an hour.
I mean, people still work in coal mines, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's all different types of jobs that are health hazards. It's actually wild how this all ties into the main topic of today's episode, which is like a giant critique on capitalism and Joe Biden's phony critique of the American reality by calling it an oligarchy, as if we haven't been in an oligarchy literally since the founding of this country.
One thing that I also like am deeply annoyed by is like we see California as this like model progressive
Liberal
state.
bastion, it's bullshit.
And the vast majority of people in the state obviously voted for Kamala Harris. Like this is a blue state, and we still are not abolishing in like literal slavery. Like involuntary servitude is slavery.
I think that when we're talking about repaying a debt to society, that can be through labor, but involuntary servitude is distinguishable from that because it's not as though there's not a set amount. You're not paying off a debt to society. You're working for a private corporation's profit.
Yes.
And
I think that's the thing that most people don't know. But I do think it puts a different tilt on it when you realize that actually the vast majority of this labor is going for private corporations.
I mean, so it's complicated because it's also like the involuntary piece has to be discussed because some people want these work assignments. They're coveted. It's not easy to get them. It affords you privileges that other inmates don't have. But in some situations, it's not chosen. It's not OSHA compliant. Like during COVID, being forced to work in the hospital wing without proper PPE gear.
Ugh, that's a big cringe.
Yeah.
Okay, baddies, with that, it's time for the vibes. This is where we talk about the intersections culturally between the law, politics, pop culture, Rachel messing with the tree. It's time for the vibes. And my vibes this week are pretty universal. It's not just me experiencing this cultural exchange that's going on the number one app on the App Store right now, Xiaohongshu, also translated to Rednote. This app, and Rachel, because she's been in trial, has literally no idea what's going on with us in the rest of the world and what's happening online. So she's learning about this in real time. And I told her not to read any of the prep that I did in our like communal doc because I want her to experience this live with you all.
I don't like being surprised. Okay. I read the spoilers before I go into any movie, book, or anything. So
okay, well, buckle up.
I'm just.
So this app is the number one downloaded app on the App Store right now.
Since when?
Over the last week.
How many?
I don't know. I think it's like hundreds of thousands domestically. And it is entirely operated in Mandarin Chinese.
Yes, I did hear about this because people are accepting the terms and conditions and they don't know what it says. Ugh.
It's sketchy, but they're doing it. So lawmakers banned TikTok because they were afraid of the influence of the Chinese Communist Party. Now they've driven what looks like nearly millions of US users to this app that is named in reference to the infamous Little Red Book, quote of quotations, by Chairman Mao. So within days, it's become common to see popular American content creators on the app introducing themselves in broken Mandarin that they've learned through Google Translate, and they are voicing their frustrations with the US government to the largely Chinese user base of this app. I knew as soon as I saw this happening and the cultural exchange and these very frank conversations between Chinese users and American users, this channel was not going to be left open for long. The Chinese government would not allow this kind of unfettered cultural exchange. Their society is incredibly locked down. And I was right. It looks like the app is planning on separating the US-based and Chinese-based servers in the next few days. That being said, I must say the amount of really beautiful cultural exchange that we've seen take place in the last few days has been funny and unexpected, but also a profoundly moving testament to the inherent goodness of human nature and that we're not as different as we may seem or that those in power may want us to believe. So here are some universal things that I have noticed in my time lurking on Xiaohongshu or Rednote. Number one, we all struggle with homework. Chinese students are posting their English homework in the comments and getting help from American users. Number two, we all question those in power. Americans and Chinese folks are comparing the costs of their medical bills and their experience with free speech and are instilling horror in everyone involved, seeing the difference in the way that our system prioritizes different freedoms and rights. And we all have irrationally intense crushes. The Chinese love Luigi. Absolutely love him.
Why did I think of Mario and Luigi and then it was like, oh wait, United Healthcare Luigi. What the fuck?
The fan art animes, super sexualized like animes, but we're also like, we've seen exchanges in the comments of folks in English and Mandarin translating back and forth with the phrase raw next question.
Raw? What does that mean? Wait, what?
Under pictures of Luigi. And this, on a more wholesome note, when asked why it is the Chinese love Luigi so much by American users, the difference in cultural ethics becomes pretty apparent. It's best summarized, I'd say, by the following viral comment from a Chinese user. There's a saying in China, those who gather firewood for the masses should not be allowed to perish from the cold in the snow and the wind.
And Americans like him because he's hot?
Pretty much, yeah.
Oh, God. That is horrible.
I think Americans also like him because we don't like the healthcare complex, but the Chinese people are definitely like more. Also, they're making like thirst trap edits of him too. So I think it's kind of everyone is moved by the message and the image.
That's such an elegant way to put things, though. It's just really wholesome.
Oh, well, it's more wholesome than what we brought to the conversation, which was raw next question. That came from us.
What is raw? Like, bruh, you keep looking at me like that and I don't know. Like, are you talking about like unprotected sex?
Yes.
I'm confused. But what does it have to do? I don't get it.
Because he's hot. That's why they're saying it.
Raw? I don't get it.
I love that for you.
Mm.
Queen. Oh my God. Okay, well, to tie this up in a bow, I do want to say, look, I'm not a fan of the way that some of these Gen Z folks have been essentially embracing the Chinese government out of spite over the TikTok ban. I get it. You're angry that our government is banning an app. And a lot of people are very rightfully angry with the US government about the way we've handled Gaza. But China has like their entire Uyghur Muslim population in concentration camps. China also doesn't allow their citizens on TikTok because they're so repressive. So please be so for real right now. Like the Chinese government is not the answer to this problem.
I don't know.
Well, those are my vibes. What are your vibes this week, Rachel?
So I'm still vibing off of our conversation last week and bringing you the update that Jockstrap is still being a little bitch.
Jockstrap Baldoni.
Yeah. So he filed an 179-page complaint in federal court in the state of New York. And I'm disgusted. He pulled a DARVO, which is deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And he tries to manufacture this story where Ryan Reynolds and Blake Lively stole his movie production from him and made up these sexual harassment claims and got the entire cast in on it to ostracize him. And I'm just like, bitch, do you think you're that important?
Yeah.
It's the delusion for me.
The other thing that I thought was interesting was, first of all, he was bold enough to like drag Taylor Swift into all of this, which like, that's so brave. And
That's insane.
yeah. So in his complaint, he basically tries to say
She pressured him, right?
Taylor Swift and Ryan Reynolds were at a meeting at Blake Lively's house where she wanted to discuss a part of the script that she like had an idea for. And in the complaint, basically all he says is that Ryan Reynolds and Taylor Swift talked about the fact that they liked it. And he took that to mean he had to accept it. There's no cognizable. So I honestly, after like reading it, genuinely think that his attorneys should be subject to sanctions for frivolous claims. You are not allowed to bring forth a claim unless you have like and put your name on it in a complaint unless you have like a good faith basis based on the evidence and the information that you have to like recognize an actual legal claim based on those facts. Like what do those facts have to do with a cognizable legal claim? He wasn't blackmailed. He doesn't even make a claim that there was an explicit show of force.
I mean, it's the business of law. If you're bringing that money and he genuinely believes he's wronged.
Yeah, but at a certain point, it's just like, we're talking about a man who he has had a history of being like a creepy sex fiend. And his complaint back is you were kind of annoying to work with.
And your husband is a bully. But honestly, I don't think that this is necessarily something that's uncommon.
No, it's not uncommon. I just think there should be sanctions for it when it's baseless.
I don't know if it's baseless, though. Like, I'm not. Okay. When I say I don't know if it's baseless, though, he's completely delusional. But I don't like discouraging people from bringing claims when they're harmed because I don't like dismissing people's harms.
I feel that. And discouraging people who may have valid claims that feel like it might be a reach based on available evidence. Like they should have their day in court.
Yeah.
I just also hate to see judicial resources wasted on somebody that's like clearly delusional.
And that's why when there's claims like these, there should just be like a public shaming because he just needs to be publicly shunned.
It should be like Game of Thrones. We like walk him through the street.
Fuck yes. That's exactly what needs to happen. I'm sorry, but these dudes need to be shamed.
I feel that.
Because the way they're acting is shameless.
Shout out to Giselle Pellico in France for shaming all those men in her trial. That was really like so brave and exactly what we're talking about. They need to be named and blamed.
I didn't see that because I kind of know what you're talking about, but I didn't know that she publicly shamed them.
So the whole reason that this woman's trial, so this is the woman in France who was sexually assaulted when her husband began drugging her and then inviting over 75 known people in to assault her. She had the option in France to have a closed trial to keep her identity a secret and maintain privacy. And she said, no, I want all of these accusers known. And I want the public to know and see their faces. And so she put herself out there and exposed her identity and took on all of that stigma to name and blame and shame all of these men. And it was incredibly brave. And I'm actually like horrified that Donald Trump is the person of the year in the year for Time magazine in the year that Giselle exists. She is the person of the year, period.
That's so many just yikes. Oh my God, I didn't know Donald Trump was the person of the year. I feel torn about that because a lot of times there's this glorification of the perpetrators when you name them. And like, I think everyone should forget Justin Baldoni's name. That's why I call him Jockstrap, because he's not worth having his name on the public record. He's not worth acknowledging.
But if we don't do it, he won't get canceled. That's what these Hollywood guys do. Like Jerry Seinfeld. No one talked about the fact super publicly when it happened that my man picked up like a 16-year-old girl in a park and then they were like in a relationship for years. That's like well documented, well known. He's a predator, but no one named him and no one talked about it. And so he got to go back to being Jerry Seinfeld. So like, I think when it's these super well-known people, like we have to name and blame and shame. I think when it's like terrorists and they're in it for like the glory and that's like their whole weird thing, then like, yeah, I totally agree.
I feel like this is a lot. Like I did not know that thing about Jerry Seinfeld, bro. And it just feels like very large waves, like boom, boom, boom. Ultimately though, Don't be a predator.
And don't file frivolous lawsuits. Just sometimes you need to accept the L and fade off into obscurity like you deserve. Okay. Well,
That killed my vibe. But let's get into this deep dive.
President Biden acknowledged that oligarchs have infiltrated the United States government in his farewell address to the nation. This is the specific quote. I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. That's the dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a few ultra-wealthy people and the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape. This has left many advocates, myself included, feeling simultaneously validated and seen and also incredibly frustrated, asking, great, but is this too little too late? So we're here to discuss.
Can we talk about how, this is the most delayed, alarmist bullshit I've ever heard? Like, bruh, this is giving when white people found out racism still exists when George Floyd died.
Yeah, it's also giving, whoa, my legacy is really not in a good place right now, and I'm going to have to do something kind of rash to try and save it. I think it's too little too late for sure, but I think before we really get into that kind of evaluation, we should take a step back. We all know that you want to be an oligarch's wife.
No, I want to live the life of an oligarch's wife.
But I don't know if we all know what an oligarch actually is. So before we talk about who you...
Wait, oligarchs are the people who have super yachts, luxury properties, private jets, and lead lavish lifestyles, which is what I aspire to. The other piece, not so much.
Yeah, according to Merriam-Webster, an oligarchy is a government in which a small group exercises control, especially for a corrupt and selfish purpose. Generally, this is a small group of wealthy people because under capitalism, wealth is the primary mechanism of amassing and exerting power and influence. Sound familiar?
Yeah, it sounds like what we've been dealing with ever since the United States was created, which is why I just think this whole conversation is so white people bullshit.
So it's even further back than when the United States was created. The battle between oligarchy and representative democracy is basically as old as the concept of democracy itself. Aristotle himself once remarked on the key difference between a democracy and an oligarchy, saying, quote, "The real difference between democracy and oligarchy is between poverty and wealth. Wherever the rulers, whether they be a minority or a majority, owe their power to wealth, that is an oligarchy. Wherever the poor rule, that is a democracy."
Okay, I figured out what I think is wrong with this quote.
Okay, please share.
It's totally class-based. It's only an analysis through one lens. I don't think that wealth is the only thing that factors into our understanding of democracy and distinguishes it from an oligarchy.
I think wealth is inextricably intertwined with oligarchy, though. If you go back to the definition, a government, well, I guess technically not, because the Merriam-Webster definition is a government in which a small group exercises control for corrupt and selfish purposes. Through almost all of modern history, though, those small groups have been controlled by wealth. They've been small, wealthy groups.
Okay, so when I think about ancient Greece, they had oligarchies, but it was also based on being a man.
But you had to be a wealthy man.
Well,
wealth was inextricably intertwined with it. That's why Aristotle himself has the quote, because that was the lived experience.
But that's just too simple of an analysis. I think it doesn't tease out the different forms and the different ways that democracy shows up.
Well, it's for sure simple. It's from 300 BC.
Bro, what do you mean? Aristotle was supposed to be this genius that had all thought really hard about shit and wrote it down.
Oh, he did, but this...
Yeah, so bruh, step up your quote game.
I mean, there's a lot of history to unfold that I don't think he could foresee, but anyway.
No, but he was also race and gender blind. But it's also prior to the Industrial Revolution, where scarcity was naturally occurring at that point. Whereas now scarcity is manufactured. So I think that...
But there was a certain degree of manufactured scarcity then. When you look at how much luxury there already was among the wealthiest families in ancient Greece, while there were people starving to death on the streets, This has been part of the human condition and a struggle in the attempt to have democracy and power for a long time. And wealth has been undermining the principles of democracy almost as long as there has been democracy, I think is the point. And in the modern age, the United States has come to be referred to as an oligarchy, I think, for a number of reasons.
Wait, did you say has come to be?
So this is exactly what I was going to say. I really see it taking shape in the last 20 to 30 years. I know you have a different perspective. So I look at it like this. Citizens United was one of the most disastrous Supreme Court decisions of all time. Essentially, it gave corporations the ability to spend unlimited amounts of money in elections, essentially giving them the ability to buy elections. And I'm not being overly dramatic when I say that. A 2024 study showed that in that election cycle, 93.93% of House races and 87.88% of Senate races were won by the candidate who had the most money. Number two, public opinion has virtually no impact in the modern age on Congress. A 2014 study found that if 100% of Americans want a bill passed, there's a 30% chance that it'll be passed. And if 0% of Americans want a bill passed, there is still a 30% chance that that bill will be passed. Where there's a much higher correlation is how many lobbyists are paid to go to Congress and influence legislation. How many corporations are putting in fat donation checks to the re-election committees of elected officials. That is what's getting laws across the finish line, not public opinion. And that feels to me like a hallmark sign of an oligarchy. And that's been the case for a really long time. And the rich are winning. Wealth inequality in this country has never been so extreme. There has been wealth inequality, but in the last 10 years, we're looking at something that is difficult to fathom. In 2023, the top 10% owned 69% of the country's wealth, while the bottom 50% of the country owned only 2.4% of the country's wealth. During the COVID crisis, the top 1% preyed on our economic downfall and took $50 trillion from the bottom 90%. This is a good deal for them, and they will do anything to preserve it.
So I fundamentally disagree on so many levels. Let me see if I can break this down. I just disagree because I think of a time when people were enslaved and so many people were enslaved and their value was they own nothing. That's what America was founded on.
Yes.
So when I think of an oligarchy, we've been in an oligarchy. I don't think that you posit this as if we've just come into an oligarchy in the recent history, okay? When I think about the United States, I think about the concentration of production in monopolies.
Yes. Okay,
And
sure.
we've always been a country of concentration of production and monopolies.
Yes.
The wealthiest were always in control.
I do agree that oligarchy has been a problem since the founding of the United States, for sure. But when you look statistically at the stratification of this distribution of wealth, it is just factually true that over the last 20 years, it has gotten to a level that it has never been. It is insane to have the top 10% have 69% of the wealth and have the bottom 50% have 2.4. And that has never been reflected in any part of American history.
I don't know. I just think that we haven't measured it. When we think about enslaved peoples having $0 to their name and the percentage of which they made up the country compared to those who had astronomical wealth.
Yeah, but even when you look at the economic statistics of after the end of slavery and all these people are basically entering an economy of value for the first time in their lives, the stratification of wealth was still not that extreme. They were massively disadvantaged, and that's a whole separate other conversation. But talking purely about economics, it is at a different level.
And I think that's just because of inflation and the way that things have inflated in value, the idea of worth.
Because it would come up evenly. But it's not just inflation. The richest 1% and 10% are so much more astronomically wealthy comparatively. It's like difficult to even fathom over the last 10 years.
You're saying they have more zeros behind their name.
No, not just more zeros, that they statistically and proportionally have so much more of the total pie than they have ever had before.
The whole idea of a democracy ever existing in this country is a joke to me. Because, so a republic is a form of government in which the country is considered a public matter, not the private concern or property of the rulers. The positions of power are attained through the consent of the governed. So the definition of republic refers specifically to a government in which elected individuals represent the citizen body, also known as a representative democracy.
Yes.
I feel like this whole idea that we are like, oh my God, we're not a democracy. Like, we've never been a democracy. We've always been an oligarchy.
See, I always find that talking point, the like, we're not really a democracy, we're a republic thing, I see it used a lot by like right wingers to try and justify grabs for power outside of like direct elected democracy. And so I'm always skeptical of like validating that because like we are a democracy. We're not a direct democracy where we don't vote on every single law that gets passed. We have a representative democracy. And that can coexist and be subsumed by an oligarchy. And we're in the part now where we're acknowledging that we've been subsumed. Because what's actually happening is that the people who are governing us aren't doing so purely by the consent of the governed. It's happening when you have 93 or 96 something percent of people winning their house races because they have the most money. That's the consent of the wealthy, not the consent of the governed.
Right, which is why we don't have a democracy, because a republic is a representative democracy. They're supposed to be one and the same.
Yeah, and I don't think that we have that either right now. I think it's becoming subsumed by the oligarchy.
Yeah, I think we never had it. It was always the oligarchy. Like, even when we look back at who the founding fathers of this country are, we're talking about
wealthy white men.
The private concern and property of wealthy white men.
Yeah, that's fair. I just think it is worse now by scales of magnitude.
I think we always think everything is worse.
Yeah, but there's like real data.
I know, but data is still based on the perception of grandeur. I don't know if we can compare what we are experiencing with what people in the past experienced and say that like what we're experiencing is any worse. Like, it might numerically appear worse, but I don't know. I think we were dismissing the human experience and the knowledge that we have people in the past learned when we act as though what is happening right now is so much worse.
Okay. I don't think that like the existence of being a person is worse. Like, quality of life has gone way up. I do think that the health of the democracy, specifically as it stands threatened by oligarchy, is unobjectionably and verifiably worse. The responsiveness of our elected officials to the will of the people can be measured statistically, and it is so much worse. The ability for someone to win an election based off of campaign contributions can be measured, and it's worse. The amount of money, period, that corporations are pouring into campaigns and lobbying can be measured, and it's worse. So, like, objectively, the health of the democracy in that sense, like, it just is.
See, I look at this more as like an evolution of white supremacy and like its control and ability to maintain its control in government and society. So previously, the concentration of wealth and the ability to manipulate and control the representatives was just facilitated in a different way.
That's interesting. That's an interesting point. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's true, right? Like, white supremacy was more blatant and explicit and accepted, and so it could play its role in influencing those in power that way.
Yeah. And, the people who were having conversations and able to impact legislation were still the selected few. And those who had influence and were able to be in those rooms, it was still controlled by white supremacy.
So this is an oligarchy that is operated by the same essential ethos, but is exerting its power in a different way.
No, it's exerting its power in the same way. It's just being facilitated in a different way.
I think we're saying the same thing.
Okay. Yeah. But I think all of this is still a result of us being in late stage racialized capitalism, also known as imperialism, that is extracting the wealth and lives of the places that they colonized.
Yeah, it was built for this. I do think the purpose of this whole conversation is like getting back to the point, which is Joe Biden decides that he's going to say this in his farewell address to the country and say it with the type of gravity that would acknowledge that this is like a fundamental threat to the nation. And yet that has been true the entire 4 years of his administration. And he was not behaving in such a way that would lead someone to believe that he was attempting to do anything about it.
Yeah, but okay. Duh. Like, I feel like this is just this is like the same conversation that we could have about any type of privilege. Like, he just acknowledged that it existed. And
Wants credit for that. Yeah.
like, but
Which is a system that he 100% benefited from.
and poured into. I don't know why people are so angry that he said it. And I also don't know why he said it in the first place.
I think that's why people are angry. Because it's like, why would you say it and say it with that like level of gravity and conviction and not have behaved in accordance with that being true for your entire administration?
Maybe he just realized.
Maybe. And it's easy to just realize it now because I genuinely don't think it's ever been more apparent. Elon Musk is the richest man in the world. And it was just announced that he is going to have an office in the White House. It has already been confirmed that Musk and other billionaires, Sam Altman, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEOs of Google and TikTok, are going to have front row seats to the inauguration of the next president. It has never been more on the nose, blatant. Like oligarchy, at least in the United States, used to be a secret. A dirty secret that they were trying to hide. Not necessarily well, and anyone who really looked could see the truth for what it was, but it wasn't something that you wanted to flaunt. And it is so being flaunted by this incoming Trump administration. And maybe that's why Biden decides right now it's time to say it. I don't know. But I do think that it's giving this sense of cowardly at best or complicit in an attempt to save his own legacy at worst.
Or it's horrified realization. I mean, it's hard to recognize these things when you're in a position of privilege and this is what you've been conditioned to believe is the ideal. Even in me jokingly saying I want to be an oligarch's wife, that is praising this ideal of the accumulation of capital, being the benefactor of,
An immoral level of extortion and extraction.
Yeah. And even, I put lipstick on a pig with this idea by saying, well, I can donate and like be the socialist of the group, like redistributing.
The socialist of the oligarch.
Yeah, the socialist of the oligarchs redistributing the wealth. But Biden is old. And maybe he really is just realizing, like, oh, fuck, we're fucked.
Dude, you know what I saw today? An amendment to one of these tax bills because they're trying to figure out how they're going to pay for the tax cuts to his corporate buddies. And one of the things that they proposed was taxing tuition scholarships to college students.
Well, Elon Musk is Trump's sugar daddy, and he's funding his lifestyle, literally.
Yeah. Well, It's going to be a symbiotic sugar daddy relationship, a sugar daddy on sugar daddy, if one might say, because Musk funded his reelection campaign, and Trump now is going to, through tax cuts and government contracts, reciprocate that favor. It's like a quid pro quo, nasty billionaire. I was going to say, and then I was like, that's crass. But then you said that. So here we are.
The United States in itself is a part of
An oligarchy culture.
Yes.
That's true. And oligarchy, I'm glad that you brought that up, because oligarchy is more than just this economic system. There's a culture of oligarchy. And I've been thinking about it a lot with the LA fires, because it's a culture in which everyone who's subjected to it aspires to be part of that small group. And that's part of, we've talked about that with white supremacy culture too. People aspire to be in that circle. And because we're conditioned to believe that we could be one of them one day, we're voting against our best interest. We're operating for their benefit under the delusion that that will be us. And oligarchy this is oligarchy culture. It's creating this overblown media spectacle out of looting in LA, because that's what the media wants to talk about, and not the real looting, which is in the wake of these fires, corporate landlords are price gouging people whose homes literally just burnt down, and the rent goes up $5,000 a month overnight. The real looting in the United States is the CEO of Blackstone, who's the largest landlord in America, becoming more than $40 billion richer in the last 10 years and raising rent by almost 80%, evicting thousands of people and spending over $14 million to oppose rent control in California alone. Oligarchy culture is talking about the people on the street, the minority of people on the street whose economic impact in whatever quote unquote crime they're committing is in the tens or hundreds of dollars, and turning a blind eye to the corporate landlord that's absolutely raking us as a culture.
I think that's hard at the same time, because people want to live comfortably. And it raises this question about how you can thrive in life while also holding space for the criticisms of the system, and how to really create change in that.
Yeah, it's almost like asking people to give up hope. Because if we live in an oligarchy and you are only really in power if you're in that like 1%,
Then you want to be in that 1%.
and when you want them to acknowledge a system that's built on them never being there, you're asking them to accept a really, really tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
And so Biden did something. He said that it exists. And people are, I don't know if they're swallowing the pill, but they're at least maybe looking at it for the first time, given these Google searches breaking records for the word oligarchy. It's time to leave you with what's been living rent-free in our heads since we talked last. Rachel, what's been living rent-free for you in your head this last week?
So Diddy's lawyers filed some motions to request that the sex tapes be produced to them so they can have their own copy. Now,
So Diddy wants a copy of the tapes,
his lawyers,
quote unquote.
and they're saying that this is a Brady violation, that
Which essentially means that people have a right to see the evidence that's going to be presented against them.
but they can see it. They just have to have a government representative, and they don't get to take the flash drive home.
But he wants to be able to take it home.
Yes, literally, he wants his own copy. And I'm just like, if people are holding space for this, this is not the social justice issue anyone should be getting behind.
So bad. He's like, man, my party days are over. At least let me relive it.
Like,
So
can you
gross.
imagine if R. Kelly was like,
Actually,
the government is keeping, yeah, but like, what? You made it. What do you need it for?
can I see that?
Oh, and he says that it's evidence that it was consensual and that she was clearly enjoying it. And I'm just like, oh, yikes.
Which, if your lawyers already have access to it, why do you need a copy of it to produce that, to make that case in evidence? You don't.
I don't know, because you definitely don't need a frame by frame analysis of people having sex. Like, video experts do exist, but this is not a shooting. This is not.
Yeah.
What are they analyzing?
I hate this.
Trying to think through what a video expert would do to that tape is actually like really disturbing me. And
Yeah, I'm trying. Look at her face. It's obviously consensual. I can see it now and all the weird misogynistic, like absolutely awful victim blamey things they're going to do. That's a nightmare. Wow. Well, now it's going to live rent free in my head. Thanks.
Before we go, what's been living rent free in your head?
Yeah, it's been a heavy week for me.
Every week is heavy. I'm realizing. I feel like we say that every single week.
I know. It's been particularly heavy, though, because we're now looking at the finalized version of a ceasefire agreement in Gaza. And I'm looking at the last 15 months of destruction. I'm relieved by this news. I'm also angry. I'm also fearful. I smell betrayal in the water. ProPublica obtained leaked documents from the Biden State Department that paint a really clear picture of the bias toward the Israeli government and in their favor during the Biden administration in a way that he wasn't admitting publicly because it was wildly unpopular. And members of the State Department, members of his State Department were explicitly told not to pursue evidence of abuses in Gaza. They were also told that they could not use phrases like the state of Palestine. Smell betrayal in the water, and I say that because Biden is now trying to take a victory lap on this ceasefire deal and is saying this is the same deal that's been on the table since spring.
So is Trump.
Yeah. If this deal has been on the table since spring and they're only just now taking it, essentially you've admitted that you had leverage that you could have used and utilized to make this happen that you simply chose not to or did not have the political will to execute. And if it took Donald Trump getting in the picture for that to happen, that just tells me a lot about what was possible and what the administration wasn't willing to do to put an end to a literal genocide. And so we're going to have a ceasefire and Trump's going to get the credit for it. And it's really just exposed a lot of difficult truths. And this also comes at the same time that we've seen polling showing that this issue alone could have cost Kamala Harris the race. A new study found that Biden 2020 voters who did not vote for Harris in 2024 cited the violence in Gaza as the top issue affecting their vote choice.
Yeah, but like that's kind of just weird to me because Trump doesn't strike me as any better, especially when he moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Like I
don't think that these people voted for Trump. I think because these are just people who voted for Biden in 2020 who didn't vote for Harris.
I know, but like still, like that's just so short-sighted. And
I mean, it's hard to say because now we're going to have a ceasefire that we might not have had.
Yeah, but we've been supposed to have a ceasefire like 7 times.
And I also think it's going to fall apart because right now, like this ceasefire agreement is only going to last for 6 weeks, if that. And then there are terms to potentially extend it. I don't envision the Trump administration spending a lot of political capital in the very beginning of his new term here protecting the Palestinian people. I just don't see that happening. I want to be wrong. I would like to believe that maybe there's a universe where he will see this ceasefire as something that's got his brand on it and his name is on the line. And so if it falls apart, it makes him look bad because people have associated him with it. And maybe that's the kind of pressure campaign we need to start thinking about executing. Because at the end of the day, like we can play politics all day long, but there are innocent civilians dying at levels that are unfathomable. And so I really start to lose my will to like play domestic politics and what's acceptable and what's going to win. And I really lose my will to play politics in the face of like just a blatant violation of humanity. But yeah, so that's just been heavy on my mind and it's been living rent free in my mind because it's still unfolding and I want to be optimistic. I really do. And I want to like hold hope, but I just don't have a lot of it in that regard. So
I feel the same way. And it feels like the Trump presidency is like impending doom. And it's like I'm watching this ceasefire and it feels like I know that like an explosion is coming.
Yeah.
But then I also like know that this Trump presidency explosion is coming. And in one sense, I feel very empathetic and sympathetic towards the people who are going to be directly impacted by the failing of the ceasefire deal, which is like so morbid to say. Like, I don't want it to be failed, but like,
Yeah. I mean, it's not something you're rooting for. It's just, it feels very likely.
yeah, but it's also just, I'm not rooting for the Trump presidency to be a complete clusterfuck.
Yeah.
You
Like,
know?
I don't want the people to be harmed who are going to be harmed by
Exactly.
everything that's coming.
But it's also like whether you choose to brace yourself or not. Have you ever been on one of those like airplane trams and someone like doesn't hold the pole and they like get yeeted? Like that's what I think about when I think about like, okay, am I gonna like hold on for what's coming, or am I just gonna be like, whoo, no?
Yeah.
Like
Hope is important, but you can't be irresponsible. You have to be prepared. And especially when you're in a position of power and you want to organize for those who aren't, you have to be prepared for all eventualities. And just being like,
I don't know if I think that people who are privileged, it's their job to organize that. Like,
oh, it totally is. I absolutely think it is. I think that you have to defer to the people who are on the ground and like really respect what they say and need. But if you're the one that is in the room with the power, it is absolutely your responsibility. Friggin' Spider-Man, Uncle Ben, great power comes with
great responsibility. I absolutely agree. But what I'm saying is there are spaces, like being a lawyer where I can advocate for people where they cannot advocate for themselves.
Yes.
But I don't like the idea of that not in the courtroom. Like, I think people can advocate for themselves, and the people who know what they need the most are those who are experiencing the scarcity.
Yeah, but advocacy takes capital. That's why it's called political capital. And we live in an oligarchy. And so people can, like, they have the ability to attempt to advocate for themselves, but ultimately the decisions are made by the people in that insular group. And until you have somebody that's in that inner circle that sees you and voices your concerns, or you find a way to disrupt their interests enough that they become invested, then change doesn't happen.
Right. So how do you have a voice if you're not trying to be an oligarch's wife? Realistically, I'm serious. Because you're trying to get into that space. Like, ultimately, you disrupt the... Yeah, to disrupt, like, I don't know. I think that maybe I should get some more credit because I have a clear plan to access and disrupt.
Oh my God.
This whole conversation has kind of been a circle of you can't get to be disrupting unless you are a functioning person in this fucked up society. And
or you garner enough community power that you have an influence. That's how they did it in the civil rights movement. They ended up using economic means. It was a bus boycott that started to move the needle in certain areas in the South, and that was a primarily economic means of sticking it to an oligarchical power structure.
yes, but it got like widely recognized when they put a figurehead on it. And it was a male figurehead because it still in some ways conformed to what was considered respectable and acceptable. So like there's just an oligarch's wife is the quickest way to a revolution. That's all I'm saying.
That's going to live in my head rent free. And that's going to be attributed, that quote's going to be attributed to this podcast. Okay, baddies, it's been real. We've got on a journey together, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.